Action RPGs, like Diablo, aren't usually something I play that often, but every now and again I get that itch. No Rest for the Wicked adds in some other elements to the genre, which felt fresh and more engaging to me than my typical foray into an action RPG. Welcome everyone, StealthyShiroean here, and today I'm doing an early access review for No Rest for the Wicked. Moon Studios, acclaimed for their Metroidvania series Ori, developed and published No Rest for the Wicked, releasing it in early access in April 2024. It's an action RPG, as mentioned, that on the outset may seem similar in style to something like Diablo or Path of Exile, but instead uses a Souls-like combat system. Since then, it had several updates, with the last large update being as recent as last June, and more updates on the horizon. So without further ado, let's get to the review. As someone who's never played either Ori and the Blind Forest or Ori and the Will of the Wisp, I can't really comment that much on Moon Studios' past work in their gameplay or storytelling departments. However, like anyone else who may know of Ori but never played it, I can definitely say Moon Studios' art direction is striking and beautiful, and does an excellent job setting the right tones for what they want for a particular section, and the game as a whole. The same holds true for No Rest for the Wicked, which features a detailed, painterly art style that mixes gothic fantasy with grounded, lived-in environments. The environment design is beautiful in a tragic sort of way. Landscapes are colorful yet worn, showing the effects of plague, conflict, and time through weathered buildings and rough landscapes. It's clear that the island of Isola Sakura has seen some things. Subtle environmental touches like shifting weather, moving foliage, and layered textures give the world a sense of presence without over-embellishment. The design relies on visual storytelling, letting the architecture, terrain, and small details convey the island's history in a way that feels natural and consistent with its tone. All of the areas in No Rest for the Wicked integrate plenty of verticality in their design. This isn't immediately noticeable either, as you might see with traditional climbable yellow or other telltale signs, as we're so used to seeing in many other games. Instead, players need to scout areas with a keen eye to notice spots that might harbor hard-to-reach items or hidden paths to other areas. Character models are well designed for the humans, player and NPC alike, animals, and other more monstrous enemies. With a disease like the pestilence, which can essentially morph people's bodies, it allows for some great and unsettling enemy designs, which actually reminded me a lot of Godric from Elden Ring. Although yes, I will admit that the humans do look a bit strange with their overly long arms.
One ugly motherfucker.
I understand that this was an aesthetic choice, but I wonder why they went with that. If that's something that turns you off about the game, then you'll be happy to know this is barely noticeable once you're wearing some clothes. The animations for all these characters were also well done. The attacks for the player and enemies alike felt like they had appropriate weight behind them. Heavier enemies felt slower and lumbering, whereas lighter enemies were snappier and quick to attack or retaliate. I think this is especially important in a game with slower combat, such as a Soulslike, as it allows the player to accurately assess attack patterns and respond to them. Finally, the audio design in No Rest for the Wicked does a lot to accentuate each area and action. Much of the game's world is filled not with constant background music, but with richly layered ambient soundscapes, distant gulls along the coast, rain pattering on rooftops, wind moving through tall trees, the creak of old timber underfoot, etc. This quiet allows the environment to feel present and lived in. In addition, each action you or an NPC performs sounds meaningful, whether the clanging of steel, the grunt of exertion, or just taking a swig of a potion. When music does come into play, it reinforces the feeling of the area, which in many cases brings hauntingly somber tunes using orchestra and choir to great effect. However, in places like Sacrament, the music has gentler tones, making it feel safe, even if you can hear the soft undertones of the feeling of loss. The audio team for both sound effects and music did an excellent job to work within the vibe that the narrative and art direction sets.
There may be no stopping this scourge.
In No Rest for the Wicked, you play as the Serum. The Serum seem to be some sort of group of warriors who specialize in combating the pestilence. And the pestilence is a disease that had previously racked the lands and can cause people to mutate. It went away because of the help of the Serum, presumably, but now it's back, and you're called in to investigate at Isola Sacra. Unfortunately, your ship is attacked before you can pull it into port, and you crash along the shore. People tend to make comments about how you are Serum and have their own opinions as to whether or not you'll be able to help them, and many of the people in Sacrament, once you make it there, have plenty of things to say regarding their current situation, you, or other goings-on. It does a lot to add to the world, but not much in the way to really drive the narrative or even create meaningful side stories. I know I'm probably being too nitpicky here, as these kinds of NPCs are par for the course when it comes to an RPG. The issue I have is that my character felt largely detached from the larger narrative, despite being such an important element to it at the same time. The side characters are barely fleshed out and aren't really that memorable, and even the main characters don't have enough meat for them to stand out or feel believable. The other reason why I felt this way is how many of the cutscenes were presented. Many of the cutscenes in the beginning seem to be more about the larger world and politics at play, rather than the Serum. A king died, so now the ruling religious leader moved in to jockey for power. They get what they want, and the Inquisition is sent to Sacrament, the main city of Isola Sacra. Presumably, this is bad, or at least the game's narrative framed it that way, but I have no idea why, or how, or what the consequences might be because of this. Then there's the awkward drama between Sacrament's leader Ellsworth and his literally rebellious daughter Odessa, as she's gone and joined up with some rebels unhappy with the crown.
We could have left her body by the side of the road with the other animals. Consider this an offering of goodwill from the church.
Where was the touch when our people were sick and starving? We're done begging for scraps. We take what we need.
Obviously, I assume these story beats will be expanded on in time, but it left me disconnected, especially since these are events that happen without the involvement of the player. I suppose they're there to suggest that there are things happening on a larger scale, and the Serum will eventually find themselves in the middle of it all. Although with all these proper name drops of groups or individuals, I couldn't help but feel that the game wants the players to think the world is deep and fleshed out, when really it's all just a veneer with not much substance underneath. Overall, I felt really disappointed with this seemingly lackluster story, especially after hearing so many good things about Ori's storytelling. Obviously, it's still in early access and we don't have the full story yet, but I wonder just how much will be changed or added to the current content already released. Although I've played several action RPGs, I tend to have the same problem with them, which usually results in a slog by the time I reach the end. And that problem is, I usually just find a good area of effect attack or two to spam consistently throughout the game. There's not much thought to it besides maybe moving to the next culling field and making sure my mana, or whatever resource it is properly topped off so I can continue killing everything in my wake. It's fun for a while, but it gets old fairly quickly. So I guess before I talk about anything else on the gameplay, let's discuss the combat. No Rest for the Wicked changes this up by introducing a stamina-based combat system that revolves around attacking while blocking, dodging, and parrying if you're actually good enough to do that. Positioning is important in fights. There are a slew of other elements in play as well based on the skills and consumables you use. However, essentially, it's a Souls-like combat in an action RPG formula. I imagine this will attract some and turn others away. For myself, I quite enjoyed it here. For full disclosure, I played as a tankier melee build using a one-handed weapon and a shield. The combat was fairly slow and methodical, but I imagine the experience will feel different based on your build. There were a ton of other weapons, but I didn't experiment that much with them except in the very beginning when I was deciding on how to start speccing my character. These other weapons do include two-handed weapons or more dexterous options like daggers or even unarmed with some wraps. In addition, there's a bunch of weapons within their own weapon class, such as one-handed having swords, axes, and maces. Along with melee weapons are also an assortment of ranged weapons, being of course bows, but also wands and staves. What really expands the combat in No Rest for the Wicked is the active skill system that uses slottable runes on weapons, as well as personal utility runes. Each weapon you get usually has one or two skills slotted to it. These runes can be extracted at the cost of the weapon and applied to other weapons of the same type. For instance, I tore this flame weapon throw from a one-handed hammer I was using and applied it to my new one-handed sword. In addition, you have, eventually, up to 4 utility runes that could do a variety of things, such as healing, knocking back enemies, or simply returning back to the hub. This allows for a lot of experimentation with a bunch of different builds. With saying what kind of player I tend to be in action RPGs, well, I guess I didn't experiment too much with this system. I found what weapon I liked using and usually just replaced it with another of the same type, bringing over the same runes that I grew accustomed to using. However, for a while, I couldn't really take advantage of these runes since they require focus to activate the skills, and that was due to my armor buffs and debuffs, which brings us to another important aspect in class building. Armor not only provides you with increased defense, but can affect a variety of other things as well. The other immediate effect is how it changes your weight class, with the obvious change being how fast you'll move or dodge. Interestingly enough, at a heavy weight class, you can shoulder bash enemies, but I usually tried to keep myself at normal, so I never really took advantage of this. Although, the main thing with the armor, and weapons for that matter, is the ability to slot gems on them to give them different buffs and / or enchant them. Each piece has slots for 4, but if you enchant them, then it takes up to 3 of those slots. Although an enchantment doesn't guarantee those 3 slots will be taken up with 3 effects. It can be as little as 1. Furthermore, you could end up getting a plagued item from enchanting, and this is where I have issues with the enchantment system. On paper, you could get really good enchantments, making it a worthwhile gamble over socketing your own gems. Furthermore, a plagued item doesn't necessarily mean it's horrible. It usually comes with a lot of benefits, but also a debuff that could be really punishing. Sometimes there were things you could do to mitigate or eliminate the negative effects, and other times you were just really screwed. In one instance, I got something that reduced my max stamina, which, okay, that's workable. I could use gems to try and counter it, maybe something to directly raise my stamina, or a gem to reduce stamina cost. In a different example, I ended up getting some pieces I wanted to use that got a debuff where I took 33% extra damage when hit and not at full focus, and another item that ended up draining my focus constantly. This is just bad luck, and you either decide to work with that as I did, or opt for different armor. However, the biggest slap in the face was when I enchanted a tower shield that gave me extra damage done and poise defense after blocking, except blocking was disabled. Like, why? That just felt broken to me and discouraging. RNG is okay, but I think it's way too punishing here, and it seems you'd be better off just using gemstones to enhance your armor. And that's exactly what I started doing with each new armor piece, especially since I gathered a bunch of these gems easily through the course of play. As I mentioned earlier, the level design features a lot of verticality, which adds to the exploration and allows for a lot of hidden nooks and crannies. Also, I really liked how each area had shortcuts and circle backed around to make traversal easy the more you explored. Although I could do without the platforming in some areas, especially Marin Woods, I don't feel this perspective is well suited to platforming. There were many times where I thought my character was looking in the exact direction I wanted him to jump, only for him to be way off. Falling to your death in a game like this is never a fun way to go, especially when it feels cheap. To the game's credit, death is not quite as punishing as a traditional Souls-like, because all you lose is some durability of your weapons and armor, which is easily repairable. Anyway, throughout all that, the game rewards exploration and overcoming combat challenges with a bunch of loot like any other good action RPG. Although I can't say that I felt particularly excited about most of it. Going off the beaten path was fun, if only to find that hidden hideaway, but the payoff for the player character usually wasn't worth it. A lot of the time you'll receive weapons and armor that you don't need or can't use because you don't have the stats. Alternatively, you may just find some resource nodes to harvest. Because, oh yeah, there's resource gathering and crafting in the game. There is a timing minigame where you need to hit the button at the right time to efficiently harvest a node, and I think you gain more resources from it, but that wasn't consistent, so I'm not too sure on that. Anyway, these resources can be used to craft items and upgrade the city of Sacrament. I can't help but feel that this area of the game needs major overhauls to make it something worth using. As for the latter use of resources, the town upgrades, I didn't really see a point to many of them. Yes, once you upgrade some of these shops up to tier 2, then you have access to resource refiners, such as turning logs into planks or ores into ingots, but you won't really use the crafting benches or need most of the extra items on sale. I did craft a couple things, but it was mainly to upgrade my resource gathering tools, which is laughable considering I barely used my resources. Okay, no wait, I take that back. I guess I did use them to upgrade my armor and weapons, which is actually important to do so you keep your edge. Outside of that, I hardly ever crafted any weapons or armor, and that's because they were for items I couldn't use. Or the real reason was so much of what I unlocked was far weaker than what I had, so I never saw the point. Unless you were to stop what you were doing and just start farming resources to build armor sets or weapons, I don't really see how crafting gear is that useful to the player. The majority of crafting I did was making food, and to a much lesser degree, crafting consumables. Food is something absolutely essential in the game, since it's one of the main ways you heal yourself. Using the stove in the cooking shop, or restaurant as it were, was absolutely essential since you can only craft some of the better tier food at a stove. Consumables was something I crafted later on, but only because I had so many resources for it. Although the game gives you so many consumables that it's hardly necessary. Not to mention, I found myself constantly forgetting to use them. It got to a point where I just kept spamming consumables in order to start trying to make room to hold more consumables. Outside of the shops, there was an inn that you could improve so you could use beds to heal yourself, but that just felt pointless as well, since why would I spend the time to load into a completely different interior just to sleep and recover health? Not when there were so many other cheap and easier options to heal myself. Probably the most useful town upgrade was the elevator, because it made it easy to talk to the Watcher, who's necessary to upgrade your character with Plague Acre, which lets you expand inventory or give you additional weapon or rune slots. One last thing to mention about crafting, and I guess gameplay within Sacrament, is the housing system. This is another thing that felt half-baked to me, but I'll admit that decorating houses and things like that usually isn't my cup of tea in games unless I'm incredibly invested into it. Anyway, there are a ton of plots in Sacrament you can purchase. I bought a few since money was fairly easy to come by, but I only ever interacted with one. Basically, the house became a place for overflow storage for crafting mats and maybe a couple pieces of gear I wanted to hold on to. I did try and make a few other pieces of furniture to decorate a bit. However, once again, unless you purposely stopped what you were doing to farm resources in order to craft furniture, then I don't really see why you would interact with this system. There are supposedly better refining machines I unlocked that I could build and place in my house. The thing is I never felt that the refiners in the shops weren't adequate enough. It seemed like things could get refined faster on better machines. However, how I usually did it is just set up a bunch of things to refine, and then went off adventuring again. Once I came back, I'd pick up the refined material and start the process once more. Never once feeling the need to have refining be a faster process. I think these systems were interesting additions to the game, but they don't seem to link up that well to the main gameplay loop. They exist as peripheries to the gameplay rather than enhancing it. In the case of upgrading the town, it felt to me more like a checklist since there wasn't much narrative or gameplay payoff.
Ain't your kind supposed to be dead?
One last thing about the gameplay that I'd like to touch on is the repeatable content as well as the overall pacing of the game. When the player first starts on the shallow shores, it offers decent pacing as you explore the beginner areas, make your way through Marina Keep, and eventually face off against your first Plague boss fight. Then you're introduced to Sacrament, and things really start to slow down. While there is a certain amount of time spent talking to people, seeing more of the story, and interacting in shops to prepare for your next venture out, the big culprit is the daily and weekly repeatable missions. And the Crucible, I suppose, but I didn't really do that nearly as much. The guard captain stands near the city's teleporting point and offers bounties and challenges to those who seek further reward. These bounties are against harder foes and can be found throughout various areas that you're leveled for. And the challenges are usually tasks that you can complete by making your way through associated areas, like needing to mine X number of copper nodes, open X number of chests, or killing X number of enemies in an area. It's something there to offer extra content, but it's pretty menial. The bounties do offer a certain level of challenge, but once you fight them a handful of times, they become fairly easy to take care of. Essentially, it's there for rewards and experience points to help level and gear up your character if you happen to be struggling in a zone. Now, I imagine this will vary from player to player, but I found myself doing these for far too long. This was partially because I'd get on to play the game only to have time just to run the daily missions and then find myself needing to get off. However, it created two problems for me. One was that I was really over-leveled for later content, and I found certain bosses and zones a complete cakewalk. The second issue was the long periods of time in between story beats that led me feeling even more disconnected to the story than I already mentioned. Eventually, I decided to start pushing forward in the main content and tried to ignore the repeatable stuff for a while, which leveled things out. By the time I made it to Marin Woods and the Lowlands, I felt I was having an appropriate enough challenge. Nothing too overly difficult, but it also didn't feel like I was cutting everyone down by just breathing on them. I even died to the Marin Woods story boss quite a few times, which surprised me, because I hadn't really encountered any challenge like that up until that point. Oh, and it's probably helpful to point out, but I played this on normal difficulty. One other thing the game does that I liked was leveling up older zones as you progress in the story. There are many different factions in the game, all with their own enemy types. I felt there was a lot of overlap in how you fight these enemies, but it was still a nice change. Anyway, as you progress, these areas can have different factions inhabiting them, and as mentioned, these enemies toughen up, so you need to be on your toes when entering an old area again. The other repeatable content of note to point out is the Crucible. I didn't do this that much, but it is essentially a roguelite mode, so you could potentially have hours of enjoyment just from this alone. And after literally just saying I didn't have much challenge up until that boss fight, well, that's not exactly true, because I felt the Crucible was fairly challenging. I'm guessing it could be because of getting unlucky draws for buffs, but the fights themselves did feel more challenging than the base content. And that brings us to my final thoughts, but first, if you're enjoying the video or found it helpful, then please consider giving this video a like and subscribing for more video game coverage in the future in the form of reviews and first impressions. No Rest for the Wicked, as stated before, is in early access currently and runs for $39.99 USD. I put just over 30 hours into the game, but I didn't complete all the content there was to offer. I had the lowland zone to complete, which I imagine that might be a few more hours depending on how slow I went through it. Plus there were probably still some other areas I hadn't explored completely, as well as the Crucible content I could do. That said, $40 seems a bit steep for an early access title, and knowing myself, I definitely wouldn't bother purchasing this unless it was on sale. Clearly a lot of work was put into the game, but when the price for early access is the same as some full price games, seems like asking for too much. Although I definitely would recommend the game despite any flaws I mentioned with it. It's trying to do something different, and general gameplay wise, I think it delivers an enjoyable experience. And the team is still working on updates, as I've mentioned, with their most recent update being this past June. Later this year they planned a multiplayer update that will bring up to 4-player co-op to the game, which I imagine will be a welcome addition for many. Given their consistent updates and that each update massively improved the game, I wouldn't be too worried about Moon Studios not being able to deliver a finished product. If you played the game, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you haven't, then let me know if it sounds like something you'd be interested in, or if you have any other questions. I hope this video helped you in some small way, and if it did, then please consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, or whatever it is you feel like doing. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.